The ocean did not roar that morning. It whispered, soft, deceptive, almost kind, as the ship shattered itself against the reef. Wood screamed, iron groaned, and human voices vanished beneath waves that showed no mercy. When the sun rose over the Indian Ocean, it revealed a sliver of sand barely breathing above the waterline. Tromelin Island. No trees. No shade. No mercy. And scattered across its burning sand were the bodies of the forgotten, slaves left to die. They had not even known the island had a name. Among them was Eve, a young Malagasy woman whose wrist still bore the scars of iron. She had survived storms before, survived hunger, survived the hold of a ship that smelled of death and despair. But nothing had prepared her for this silence, the kind that follows catastrophe, when hope itself seems drowned. The ship, Lotile, had been carrying illegal slaves from Madagascar despite the laws that claimed slavery was ending. The white crew had names, ranks, and promises of rescue. The slaves had none of that, only chains and silence. When the ship broke apart in 1761, everyone fought the sea the same way, desperately, violently, praying to gods who might not hear them over the waves. By some miracle, or curse, most survived the wreck. The crew gathered what supplies they could. The enslaved gathered each other. The island was nothing more than a sandbank, barely a kilometer long, with no fresh water and no vegetation. The sun burned skin by day, the wind sliced bones by night. Birds screamed overhead, circling as if already waiting. Within days, the truth revealed itself. The French sailors built a camp on one end of the island. They salvaged planks, nails, canvas. They organized. They planned. They spoke of escape. On the other end, the slaves waited, watching, listening, hoping they were still human in the eyes of those who held their fate. Eve remembered the moment the captain spoke the words that would haunt history. "We will return." They said it calmly, casually. They promised they would come back for the slaves after building a smaller boat. The enslaved were ordered to help, cutting wood, hauling debris, risking their lives in the surf. They worked because obedience was all they had ever been taught to survive. When the boat was finished, the crew climbed aboard. They took the water. They took the food. They took the iron tools. And as the sail caught the wind, Eve realized the promise was already dying. The ship grew smaller. The horizon swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was worse than screams. At first, they waited. Days passed. Then weeks. The sun rose and fell like a cruel metronome counting time toward death. People began to weaken. Lips cracked. Children cried until their voices broke. Some drank seawater and went mad. Some simply lay down and never stood again. Eve refused to lie down. She gathered the others, women mostly, a few men who still had strength left. They counted themselves. 60 souls abandoned. 60 lives erased from the world in a single sail. "We are not dead yet," Eve said, her voice hoarse but firm. "So we will live." Survival became an act of rebellion. They learned the island's secrets the hard way. Rainwater pooled briefly in shallow hollows after storms. They dug pits with bare hands to collect it. Birds nested nearby, eggs became treasure. They learned how to trap turtles when they came ashore to lay their own eggs, how to use sharp coral as knives. Fire was the miracle that changed everything. Using flint salvaged from the wreck and endless patience, they coaxed flame from sparks. Fire meant cooked meat, boiled water, warmth, and hope. They guarded it like a living child, never letting it die. Shelter followed. Using broken planks and woven palm fibers washed ashore, they built crude huts that barely held back the wind, but they were homes. Death still came. One by one, the weakest fell. Each burial was marked not with words, many had forgotten their language, but with hands pressed into sand, with tears swallowed because water was too precious to waste. Years passed. The island became a prison measured not in walls but in horizons that never changed. Children were born who had never seen Madagascar, never known chains, never known a world beyond sand and sea. Women became leaders, builders, hunters. Eve grew older, her hair threaded with gray, her body scarred by sun and survival. They never stopped watching the horizon. Sometimes ships passed, too far. Sometimes sails appeared and vanished like cruel mirages. Each time, hope rose, and broke. Eve taught the children stories of where they came from. Of green land, of rivers, of trees taller than dreams. She refused to let memory die, because memory was proof they had once mattered. What the world did not know was that France remembered Tromelin. But memory did not equal mercy. Paperwork was lost. Reports were buried. The rescue promised in 1761 slipped through the cracks of history, drowned in indifference. Years became decades. 15 years. 15 years of sunburned skin, of makeshift graves, of children growing into adults who had never known freedom yet learned it anyway by surviving without masters. By the time a French ship finally anchored off Tromelin in 1776, only 8 remained. 7 women, 1 infant. Eve did not live to see the sail. She had died months before, lying beneath a sky she had memorized completely. But her legacy stood in the survivors who walked to the shore when the rescue boat arrived, thin, scarred, unbroken. The sailors were stunned. They expected bones. They found people. The women did not cry. They did not beg. They stood tall, carrying the child, carrying 15 years of defiance in their eyes. They boarded the ship not as property, not as cargo, but as survivors history had tried to erase. When they reached Mauritius, they were finally declared free. Free, after a lifetime stolen. Free, after 15 years abandoned by the world. Today, Tromelin Island is quiet again. Wind over sand, waves over reef. But beneath that silence lies a truth heavier than stone. These people were not saved by nations or laws or promises. They were saved by each other. Their story is not just about slavery or abandonment. It is about what remains when everything is taken away, how dignity can survive without witnesses, how hope can burn without fuel, how humanity can endure even when the world turns its back. The slaves of Tromelin were left to die. Instead, they chose to live. And in doing so, they carved their names into history, not with ink, but with survival.